Hello, it's Martin back with the Hyundai IONIQ 5, and I thought I would take this opportunity to show you all you need to know about adjusting the driving settings in these vehicles. The same applies for the sister cars, like for example the Kia EV6s, because there is a lot to fiddle with. Starting with obviously the paddle shifters for adjusting the regenerative braking, but there is a lot more to those than what meets the eye. Additionally, you've got the different drive modes, and these can interact differently based on what region setting you are in. And lastly, there are some more settings buried inside of the infotainment menus. So I hope that you will find all of this information helpful, regardless of whether you already own an IONIQ 5 and you just want to know how to get the most out of it, especially when it comes to range, because some of these things do affect what kind of efficiency you get, or whether you are just in the researching stages and you want to know everything there is about these cars. As we emerge out of the black hole tunnel, let's start by discussing the regenerative braking paddles. These look like paddle shifters on a combustion engine vehicle with an automatic gearbox where you can switch gears manually. But here, of course, they control the regen braking because there are no gears to shift. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of regenerative braking, it's pretty much a feature standard on all EVs, and it's because the electric motor can also act as a generator or a dynamo. This has two effects. It will charge the battery a little bit, and the extra resistance of the drivetrain will slow the vehicle down. And that's one of the many reasons why electric cars tend to be more efficient in town than on the motorway. Not the only reason, but a big contributing factor. Anyways, back to the topic. I can see my selected regen level right at the bottom left corner of the instrument cluster. So we are currently in level 2, which is almost like a middle setting. The scale ranges from 0 to 3. So if I press my right paddle, that will decrease the level into level 0. Level 0 effectively means coasting. So now we are going over the crest of the hill, and if I let go of the accelerator pedal completely, you will see that we are not really scrubbing any speed. In fact, we are gaining speed as we are going downhill. This can be very comfortable on motorways because at the end of the day, even though we have got this regenerative braking which can charge the battery a little bit, to cover a certain distance, it's still the most efficient to just coast. Because if you think about it, with regen braking, first you need to speed up, spending power to feed the electric motor, and then you slow down, recapturing some of that energy. But every time you charge and discharge the battery, there is a little bit of a loss, so you never get all of it back. For me personally, I rarely use level 0, and it's because the IONIQ 5 is quite a big and heavy car, which means that sometimes you get caught off guard and you fly into an intersection carrying a lot of speed. If we go down one notch by using the left paddle shifter, we enter level 1. And yes, it's the left paddle which increases the regen strength, so even though the numbers are going up, it feels like you're downshifting in a combustion engine vehicle. Now it feels like a traditional car with an automatic gearbox. So if you're new to EVs and you just want to get used to the drivetrain, this is the mode to be in. Because now I'm doing the speed limit, which is 50 miles per hour, but the moment I let go of the accelerator, there is a little bit of regen that's also indicated on this right-hand dial, but it's nothing too dramatic. So even if you suddenly take your foot off the accelerator, there's not a massive jerk, you will not make your passengers sick, and that little bit of resistance feels very similar to the resistance you would get from the combustion engine just sitting at above idle revs. And you can imagine how the rest of the system goes. You press one more time for level 2, which is my personal favorite. It's a nice balance of having significant regen braking, but it still forces you to look ahead and be very predictive and smooth with your driving. And lastly, level 3, where it's pretty aggressive. It's like being in a very low gear in a combustion engine car. The nice thing is that despite having strong regen, the transition onto power can be still very smooth. So this is not like a combustion car where if you are in sport mode and in a low gear, the transition from the engine not having any fuel and then providing power being quite jerky, this is super smooth. Also important to mention is that you can still regulate how much of the slowing down effect you get using your right foot. And I have to be honest, I lied a little bit because underneath level 3 there is one more strength which is called I-pedal. But to demonstrate that, we will need to get onto some roads with slower moving traffic. I-pedal is basically Hyundai's marketing word for one pedal driving, which means that you've got very strong regenerative braking, which brings you to a complete stop. In other words, the creeping of the vehicle gets disabled, which is perfect for scenarios like this when you are in stop and go traffic, because you don't have to keep switching pedals as you are lifting off and slowing down. Importantly, not all one pedal driving is created equal. It's all about the tuning and how it's implemented in the vehicle, but I'm glad to report it's quite well done in these Hyundai products. The starting from a standstill is fairly smooth. There is a little bit of a rocking sensation as the motors go from the holding mode to releasing the regen and then getting moving, but you can come to a stop super smoothly without the passengers noticing the transition from low speed all the way to a complete standstill. This consistency and predictability makes it very easy to just inch forward millimeter by millimeter if you need to, but the moment you put your foot down to really go, the car will pick up the pace as you would expect it to. I would like to nerd out and comment on the technical background and how it works, because it does affect the end result. The IONIQ 5 uses a permanent magnet motor. In the case of this all-wheel drive version, 2 permanent magnet motors, one on each axle. The result of those is that they can regen all the way down to 0 miles per hour. With induction motors, those generally give out once you get to a very low speed, and to facilitate the one pedal driving experience, those cars generally then blend in the physical brakes to make sure that the car is held if you are just sat stationary. It's not always the case. For example, Tesla Model 3s used predominantly a permanent magnet motor on the rear axle, but even then they do blend in the physical braking, whereas the BMW i3 is what this feels quite similar to. Those cars also have a permanent magnet motor and they can come to a complete stop without ever engaging the brake pads on discs. And I think it's very difficult to tell with these modern, very well insulated cars. It feels like that's what's happening in the case of the IONIQ 5. There's no grabbing of the discs, at least while the vehicle is moving. Maybe then once your stationary system does that, but actually you sometimes feel and hear that, but I'm not getting that sensation in this vehicle. For better or for worse though, that means that if you are in iPedal mode, both of the motors on this all-wheel drive version of the IONIQ 5 are engaged. And that can have an impact on efficiency, and we will touch on that later in the video. There are also some other quirks. So with this generation of IONIQ 5s and the sister products like the EV6, keep in mind this is a 2022 IONIQ 5, it only features iPedal in drive. So it can bring you to a complete stop, but if you, for example, start maneuvering or reversing into a parking space, the moment you switch into reverse, the car will start creeping backwards. And then again, when you go back into drive, having been in reverse, that cancels iPedal and it will start inching forwards again in the level 3 regen mode. I believe it's the KIA EV3, which is the first vehicle built on the eGMP platform to have iPedal also work when you are in reverse. Other than that, it works pretty well. As I mentioned, the smoothness is quite good. It's not quite on par with something like a Tesla Model 3 or Model Y, but it's fairly close. You wouldn't struggle too much. It's not even the slowing down which is the issue, it's usually the lifting off, which I find just a touch too jerky, but that's really just nitpicking. Other than that, it works beautifully, and even when you are on quite a steep uphill, it can bring you to a complete stop and hold you there without moving back an inch. And the same goes if you want to just creep forwards millimeter by millimeter, it lets you do that without any trouble, which is a sign of a well-tuned system. But realistically, because of the so many compromises it brings, especially in combination with the all-wheel drive and the impact on efficiency, to me it always felt like iPedal was tacked on at the end to just tick a box saying we can offer one pedal driving experience for the drivers who demand it. Combine this with the fact that you have to re-enable it every time you drive. I usually just drive in the level 2, and that way the car remembers that state every time I restart. And the creeping is also quite well tuned, so I personally don't find it too big of a deal to slow down to a complete stop using the brake pedal. With all of the manual modes out of the way, let's show you the auto levels of regeneration. And if you're wondering, hold on Martin, your beard has grown a little bit longer, that's because this is the third time I'm recording this section of the video, because there is a lot of information to go through. But to keep on topic, I will exit out of iPedal for now And to switch to the automatic regen system, you just press and hold the right paddle for a couple of seconds. If you look closely, you will see that the distinct levels at the bottom left of the instrument cluster have been replaced by an auto symbol with a continuous bar underneath. The length of that bar indicates how strong the level of recuperation is the moment you let go of the accelerator pedal. So now this is practically an automatic equivalent of the manual level 3 strength, which means that while I'm not gaining on the traffic ahead, the moment I let go of the accelerator pedal, there is very strong regenerative braking applied. Important to mention, there is no I-pedal equivalent in the automatic mode, so this is the strongest setting, which in other words means that this system cannot disable creeping. So while the regenerative braking and the slowing down effect is quite strong, it will not bring you to a complete stop. So when you are just driving in town, you have to remember to press the brake to actually slow down past about 5 miles per hour. In my eyes, this setup doesn't make much sense in practice, because if you want strong regen braking, you probably want it set manually so you can slow down consistently every time. The idea of the auto system is that you can coast whenever there is nobody ahead of you, on motorways for example, but the system will automatically add more regen when you need it. So just by short pressing the pedals, I can cycle through the different auto levels, and while they are not numbered like the manual ones, the concept is very similar. And that's not all, because there's even more settings in the infotainment system. You need to go into the settings app, then electric vehicle settings, and you scroll down into smart recuperation, and there are 3 options. Unfortunately, there is no level 0, so you never have full and complete coasting with these auto levels. But if you want to get the closest to it, you have to select the slower/smoother deceleration. So as an example now, we are going up a slight hill, but if I let go of the accelerator pedal completely, there is an absolute minimal amount of regen and we are still coasting pretty nicely. That's because I'm not gaining on the vehicle ahead of me. If I was driving a little bit quicker, so let's say the national speed limit on this road, which is 70 miles per hour, and I let go of the accelerator pedal now, you see a lot more regen is automatically applied to keep me a safe distance away. The way you know that you can trust a system that is recognizing the vehicle ahead and will slow down accordingly is if the auto symbol is lit up in blue. And just to demonstrate it, if I move into the passing lane here, the auto symbol is still present, but the font has turned from blue to grey, which means it will just follow the default behavior of whichever mode you are in, i.e. in this case, coasting, or almost coasting. So just to make it clear, these adjustments in the infotainment system set the off-throttle regenerative braking, the default behavior of it, in this weakest level of automatic recuperation. And just so you can imagine the strength, the smooth deceleration setting is very similar to level 0. You just have a tiny bit more regen than in the manual level 0, whereas the strongest setting is not quite as strong as level 1. So that's the boundaries you are moving in between, and the rest of the scale, when you use the paddles and you go into any of the other auto levels, those are preset and unaffected by the settings in the infotainment system. And as we enter this car park, let me show you the last bit. I will switch back to the manual modes, and I'm now in level 0, which means coasting. But let's say that I want to stop on this giveaway line. I can just press and hold the left paddle, and that engages max regenerative braking mode, and it can bring you to a complete stop, at which point you can release the paddle, but the vehicle is still in the so-called stopped mode. So the regen is basically holding me still. It's almost like a temporary I-pedal where creep gets disabled. So now I only start inching forward once I give the accelerator pedal a nudge, at which point creep gets activated, doing about 5 miles per hour, and obviously I can give it more power. If I don't want to come to complete stop, I just want to slow down, let's say from 20, I can hold the paddle to about 10 miles per hour, I let go, and we continue rolling forward in the mode we had previously selected. How useful is it really? In my eyes, not much, because you have to really perfectly time when you press the paddle to stop at the edge of the intersection, and importantly, if you want to be a smooth driver, instead of going up to speed and then slowing down quite abruptly last minute, you should start slowing down much earlier and at a more gradual rate. This max deceleration mode is present on older Hyundai and Kia cars, so for example like Hyundai IONIQ, which do not have I-pedal driving, but they do already have this max mode, so you can use that in a pinch. This discussion about one-pedal driving also always brings up the confusion about the difference of that versus auto hold. And the main concept is that with one-pedal driving, you should be able to come to a full and complete stop without pressing the brake pedal at all. Whereas with auto hold, I have a dedicated shortcut button for it right here by my right knee. And if I press that, I get a grey auto hold symbol in the instrument cluster. I let go of the pedals, we are still coasting. And if I slow down to like 2 miles per hour, unlike one pedal driving, which would have brought me to a stop, we are still creeping forwards. It's only if I come to an intersection and do a full stop and I keep my foot on the brake, auto hold gets lit up green, which means at that point I can let go of the brake pedal and the car is holding the brakes for me. The moment I tap the accelerator pedal, instead of just moving a little bit, we have gone into creep and we are inching forward. From my perspective, I'm not a huge fan of it, because now we've come to a stop and the car is holding the brakes, which can be lovely at the red light, for example. But let's say that we want to maneuver into a tight parking space. I know, not a good example here because there's plenty of spots available, but let's say that we start turning, and even if I stop very gently here and go into reverse, the car is still holding the brake. And I need to give it the accelerator input to get moving. And as you can imagine, if you want to go really up close to an obstacle, like for example here to this tree, even if you're just very gently holding the brake pedal, the car has now activated auto hold, but I'm very close to that tree, but not close enough. So let's say that I want to go a little bit tighter. I need to press the accelerator pedal, but then that starts reversing quite abruptly and I need to tap the brake again, and it has activated auto hold again. So if you imagine trying to parallel park up a hill with auto hold enabled, it will just make your life very difficult. And unlike some other brands, once auto hold is enabled, you can't press the brake pedal firmly again to temporarily deactivate it and go into creep mode. You just have to tap the accelerator pedal and then you have to use the brake to slow down again. It just isn't the best system for low speed maneuvering, and combined with the fact that with an electric car you do have the option of one pedal driving, for me it basically stays turned off. And before we move on, let me quickly touch on some of the quirks and limitations of these regen levels, because a lot of people ask whether they get reset every time you restart the vehicle or whether you can save them to your user profiles in the infotainment system. And unfortunately I've got some bad news. So I have gone and made a separate account in this screen here. So if we go into the top left corner, I'm now logged in as myself. But if we go into driver 2, I've set the theme of the infotainment to the dark mode. And you can already sense that it has started switching over because the screens have gone black and the air conditioning has shut off. But the level of the regen braking has not been altered at all. So again, for demonstration purposes, you need to be in drive to change the regen level. I will go into level 3, back into park. I will change the user profile into Martin again. Air conditioning comes back to life. The screens go into light mode, but the regen strength is still at level 3. So if you're planning to share the car with a partner and they, for example, like it to feel just like a normal automatic car and they like to have it in level 1, and you like one pedal driving and you like high regen strength, then you will have to change that setting using the paddle shifters every time you get in, I'm afraid. And as already mentioned with iPedal, if you want to have that on all the time, the car will default to level 3 after every restart, so you will have to press the left hand pedal once to activate one pedal mode as you start driving. A lot of people get excited about all of these options and the modes, and that they will try to drive using just the pedals to maintain speed. So for example, if I'm going downhill to not gain speed, I will go down a level into level 1 and then I will ease off using level 0. It is technically possible, and Hyundai, I don't know whether this is carried over from their combustion engine models, but there are little dimples on the backs of these paddle shifters. One of them has a dimple which is indented and the other one bulges out. So even if your hands are crossed over, for example, you can still feel which way is up and which way is down. But the reason why I'm saying this is not an optimal solution is because of the transitions between the different levels. So I will get a little bit technical, but imagine if you are in level 0 and fully coasting, when you fully let go of the plus pedal in the case of the IONIQ 5, that's the neutral point where no power is applied. And the further down you press, the more power you feed to the motors. Fairly obvious stuff. However, as you keep going through the different modes, that neutral point is almost moving down in the travel of the pedal, because you need to be able to control the regen. Because you have to remember, even in the strongest level 3, it's not all or nothing. You can still control how much regenerative braking effect you have, and you can still coast. So if I want to just maintain speed on this stretch of road, I can balance my foot just right, and I'm pretty much not spending any power nor gaining any power back. And likewise, if I want to slow down just a little bit, I can slightly ease off, but I'm still keeping my foot on the accelerator to control the deceleration rate. The reason why I'm trying to make this clear is that as you shift, the changes to the mapping of the accelerator pedal are pretty much instant. So there is a little bit of a jerk, even if you keep your foot pressed at the same position, which just makes it a little bit uncomfortable for the passengers because they can feel a jerking sensation. And this is especially the case of the throttle. If you are applying regen, there is no smoothing happening in between the modes, which is a bit of a bizarre decision from Hyundai's part in my eyes, but that is what it is. It feels like shifting through gears in a sports car. Hence, I will leave it in my favorite level 2, and that's it. And with all of that covered, I think it's time to discuss the driving modes. So far we've been driving in comfort mode, and I've intentionally left this graphic of the all-wheel drive system on screen. It's because with the all-wheel drive IONIQ 5s, they default to using the rear motor to do most of the driving. So for example, we are doing 60 miles per hour. It's mostly the rear motor doing the work, but if I wanted to overtake and I floor it, the front engages fairly quickly as well to help out with the power request. Unfortunately, I don't know any more details other than what the graphic shows, but my suspicion is that in comfort mode, the front motor is de-energized, but because it's a permanent magnet motor, there is still a little bit of a drag and loss as you are moving along. To fully get rid of that, you can go into eco mode. You switch modes using this button on the steering wheel. And in eco mode, you will see that the graphics of the instrument cluster have changed as well. This is entirely customizable. So if you like a certain style, you can always go into settings, vehicle, cluster, and then cluster theme. So for now I've got it linked to the drive mode, but if you just like a certain layout or look, you can manually force it to stay in that regardless of which mode you are in. But what I was going to say is that in eco mode, the IONIQ 5 uses a clutch in the front gearbox, well, reduction gear set for the front motor, which means that at these steady cruising speeds, it is completely open and disconnected, and you will have less of a loss. So you will definitely get better range in eco mode. The trade-off is that firstly with eco mode, the accelerator pedal response is quite a bit softer, so it's definitely not as responsive when it comes to overtaking, for example. And if I let my speed drop a little bit, the moment I floor the throttle, you see that the front motor didn't engage. So in this mode, you essentially have a detuned rear-wheel drive IONIQ 5. A very important thing to mention is I-pedal, because if you want one-pedal driving, even if you're in eco mode, because that front motor is used to help slow the vehicle down and hold it still, that clutch is always closed, which means that even if we are cruising at 50 miles per hour, the front motor is doing some of the work. So despite being in eco mode, if I-pedal is enabled, that closes the clutch, and it means you will get a little bit less range. So unless you're in town and you really like the one pedal feeling, I would just say go into any of the other levels, like level 3, where you will get the same strength of regeneration. It will not really affect how the car feels on motorways, but you will squeeze out a little bit more range. So still in eco mode, and level 2 we are just using the rear motor. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have got sport mode. I can feel the throttle has been remapped yet again to be a lot more responsive. The graphics have changed and the front motor has been engaged again. And the idea is that to give you maximum responsiveness and availability of power, that motor will be always engaged. You basically have permanent all-wheel drive, and the moment you want to overtake, for example, I just give it a light nudge, it literally throws your head against the headrest. The last option here with the driving modes, which is not very often talked about, is the snow mode. So if you just keep pressing the drive mode button, it will keep cycling through the modes. But if you press and hold for about a second, you get snow mode. If you looked closely, you may have noticed that we went from level 2 to level 1 regen, and that's because with snow mode there are some limitations. The idea is to make it as easy and safe to drive on the snow. Regen is limited between levels 0, which is coasting, and level 1, but it will not let me go into level 2. It just complains that that is not possible in snow mode. The car really encourages you to drive smoothly. You also have permanent all-wheel drive, and the traction and stability control are tuned differently. So from a standstill, it will feel like the car is very lazy, and that's all to limit wheel spin. But if you do get some wheel spin, it will not cut the power as aggressively as in any of the other modes. Unfortunately, I can't really demonstrate this for you because the weather is actually quite nice for once here in the UK. You exit snow mode by pressing the drive mode button once, and now I'm back into normal. The graphics for the snow mode are the same as for normal. Lovely. So with that, the last bits are in the infotainment system. You need to go into the settings app and into vehicle settings, and right in there you can go into drive mode. Here you can customize the brake pedal feel. You can only change the setting when you are parked, but I will be very honest, I've tried the car with both a normal brake mode and in the sport brake mode, and there is very little difference day to day. Maybe it's because I mostly use the regen braking, so I rarely have to touch the brake pedal. If you were probably on country roads and you were smashing on the brake pedal, you would notice more of a difference. The next option is simply to do with the climate control. If this tick box is enabled, that means that regardless of which driving mode you are in, the climate control will be in eco mode. I found it to be sufficiently strong in eco mode, especially for short journeys. It means that it doesn't rush to get the cabin up to temperature as aggressively, and you are a little bit more efficient. I mostly just drive around town, so I'm perfectly happy with this. If you want the maximum air conditioning and heating power, you can deselect that, and it means in normal mode and in sport mode it will behave differently to when the car is in the eco driving mode. As for remembering the driving modes, if you turn off the vehicle in either normal mode or eco and you restart it, it will restart in the same mode as it was left in. However, if you turn it off in sport or snow, it will then default back into normal. So if you just like to drive in sport with the permanent all-wheel drive and maximum power all the time, you will need to press the drive mode button once every time you start the car. Just like with iPedal resetting, I think this all has to do with range testing and how these cars are certified, with the sport mode and iPedal keeping both motors engaged and powered at all times. That I would assume would take too much of a hit, which would cut that lovely figure Hyundai puts into the brochure, whatever that is. For this all-wheel drive version, I realistically get about 210-ish miles on a charge in normal mode at motorway speeds. In fact, if you want to see how the IONIQ 5 does on a longer trip, make sure to check out the previous video I've done on the channel, where I've collected it from Plymouth and driven it all the way to London. I really enjoyed that trip. But yeah, other than that, I think this is a good point to wrap up on. I hope I covered everything you wanted to know. It's a lot of complicated information, so I hope I did a good job of explaining it. If you think so, make sure to hit the like button to show the appreciation. And yeah, subscribe if you want to see more EV content. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.